PHL 17 presents In Focus, a look at the issues affecting the Philadelphia region. Now your host, Steve Highsmith.
The recognition of the legal right of gay and lesbian couples to marry appears to be happening quickly. Truth is, it's not yet complete, and what has been achieved is the result of a long process. In addition, even where that recognition is firm, actually being married raises new questions for couples who up until recently were not allowed to face those questions. I'm Steve Highsmith, and welcome to In Focus. Same-sex marriage is legal in 32 states. This has come about through legislation, constitutional amendment, or court action. But the U.S. Supreme Court now seems reluctant to establish, at least at this time, the nationwide right of same-sex couples to marry. And amid the uneven landscape, new questions arise for same-sex couples about taxes, estate planning, and more. With me now is Kristen Bennett. Ms. Bennett is an attorney with the law firm Gawthrop Greenwood. Her principal area of expertise is in estate and tax planning. Good to see you, Kristen. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
How uneven is this landscape when you look at the nation, or look at the region, you look at the state and federal government? What do you tell a gay or lesbian couple that comes to you and says, what do we need to know?
You need to know a lot of things. First, you need to know where you're planning to be. Because what you mentioned was there is an uneven landscape. Only 32 states in the District of Columbia currently recognize same-sex marriage. While Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware all do, if you were to move out of the region, especially into the Deep South, some of the states in the Midwest, your marriage won't be recognized.
So it's not portable?
It is not portable. States that do not recognize same-sex marriage within their state are not required to recognize same-sex marriage that is performed in other states.
How dangerous is this in the sense of if I'm married in Pennsylvania, but I go to one of the other 18 states that is not yet recognizing it, and something should happen in those states, if I have to go to the hospital or my partner has to go to the hospital, or if I should die in one of those states, do they have problems in that relationship then in trying to legally get access to health information or to deal with the estate?
Yes, to all of that. So you really do need to be careful if you're traveling out of your home state, because you're right, if you were to get sick or there was an accident in another state that doesn't recognize your union, you may not be able to get access to healthcare information. You may not be able to make decisions about your spouse's medical treatments. We recommend that all of our clients, but especially same-sex couples, have ready access to their HIPAA authorization and their advanced healthcare directive.
You need a power of attorney too? Does that come into play in this or in other areas?
It can. The power of attorney generally allows someone else to make legal and financial decisions on your behalf. So those are not the most pressing things when you think of illness or a medical emergency, but it is good to also have that document available.
Well, traditional or heterosexual married couples have not really thought about a lot of these things in the past, so why should gay and lesbian couples think about that? I mean, in other words, so say I'm going to stay in Pennsylvania or New Jersey or Delaware. I'm not going to travel much, or I'm not going to worry about the times that I travel. If I stay in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Delaware, what do I need to know? Is there still something different from what I need to know for what heterosexual couples who are recognized?
There can be some differences. In all three states, the rights and benefits of a same-sex couple is going to be absolutely equal to the rights and benefits that a heterosexual couple has. But there can still be differences. I think New Jersey is an interesting example. They started out with a domestic partnership law, and then they moved to civil unions, and then they moved to same-sex marriages. If you were domestic partners under the old law, or even parties to a civil union under the last version of the law, you're not necessarily married under New Jersey law or the law of any other state. So you still have to watch out for exactly how you formalized your union and is that marriage. So a lot of couples, especially in Delaware and New Jersey, where you had same-sex unions, will need to go back and actually get married.
When you catalog, and I don't know if you've done this, but for years, advocates for same-sex marriage legalization and recognition have said that there are more than 1,000 laws or benefits that people who've been allowed to marry have that people who aren't married don't have, even with a civil union or even with some other relationship. So it is important to be married from a legal standpoint, but let's not deal with the emotional part of it yet, or whether it's a good idea between couples. That's their decision. But in terms of the law, you still do get benefits as a result of marriage, right?
Yes.
I mean, that hasn't changed.
That has not changed.
So there is a legal benefit to it. And let's back up just a little bit. The federal government has taken positions on this. So when it comes to federal tax law, what's the difference now?
If you are married and you have a valid marriage under state law, the federal government will recognize your marriage. They will recognize your marriage for federal income tax purposes, for estate and gift tax purposes. So you do have that marriage and those federal tax benefits. You also get benefits if you're married. You now get to take FMLA leave if something happens to your spouse. Whereas just a couple or even parties to a civil union, it wasn't clear that the Family Medical Leave Act applied to people in a civil union.
Well, let me get slightly more complicated for you. Say I'm a gay couple in Pennsylvania, married legally in Pennsylvania, but moved to a state that doesn't recognize that marriage. Does the federal government still recognize me as being married, or does it say, no, now because you're in that state, you're not?
So that's an interesting question, because when the federal government started to recognize same-sex marriages, they did not require other states that don't recognize them to recognize them. But the federal government will recognize the marriage for income tax purposes, even if you're living in a state that does not allow same-sex marriage.
So on taxes then, if it's a good idea just for tax reasons to file jointly, I can do that now, correct?
Yes,
a gay
absolutely.
and lesbian couple could do that now in Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Delaware.
Yes.
When it comes to gift taxes, you mentioned that. What benefit is there? What's the limit now individually? Like
$14,000 per person per donee.
So if there's somebody I want to give money to and I have $14,000 to give, as an individual I can do that. But now there's a benefit.
Yes, so there's actually two benefits. One, same-sex couples can now make gifts between themselves. They're not subject to the $14,000 limit anymore. A year ago, before we had same-sex marriage in Pennsylvania, if one partner had transferred assets to the other partner, it would have been subject to gift tax. So even adding a partner to a spouse, or I'm sorry, to a house or to a beach property or to an investment account was a gift. So now transfers between spouses aren't gifts, but also you can take advantage of both spouses' annual gift tax exclusion. So you, as one party to a marriage, could actually give away $28,000 to one individual or even a number of individuals using your spouse's gift tax exemption.
When it comes to retirement planning and savings, how are 401ks or IRAs, for example, affected by this?
So this is a pretty big change in the law. One, spouses, you can now, a non-working spouse can fund an IRA based on the community earnings. Also, if you inherit an IRA or 401k plan from a deceased spouse, you have a lot of options. You can treat that as your own IRA, which will significantly reduce your income tax burden as you take out distributions, because you can take them out over your lifetime instead of having to take them out in large chunks.
In terms of wills, is it important, any more important to have a will now, or might a couple say, well, wait, there are default laws for married people, so now I don't have to worry about a will? What would you say to them?
Right, I would caution against that. There are default laws, and they do tend to favor spouses and children. However, there can still be some issues, and you want to do that planning. You want to have a will in place and an executor appointed. If you were to move out of this state into a state that does not recognize same-sex marriage, your spouse would not be entitled to any of your assets at your death. So it is still very important to do a will.
So on a yes or no, does being married now for a gay and lesbian couple, does that mean that the legal paperwork gets simpler or more complicated?
It gets simpler.
Which means the lawyer should charge less, is that correct? All right. We'll leave it there. Stay tuned for that answer. Thank you very much, Kristen. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great advice. Coming up, one of the nation's leading civil rights advocates assesses where gay and lesbian rights stand today in practice, and later a look at an organization making a difference in Philadelphia and elsewhere in the world for 50 years ahead on In Focus on PHL 17. We're back on In Focus. I'm Steve Highsmith. We're talking about the changing landscape of marriage rights affecting same-sex couples. With me now is Malcolm Lazen, an attorney and executive director of Equality Forum. The Philadelphia-based organization is one of the nation's leading LGBT rights advocates. Malcolm, good to see you again.
Thank you, Steve.
So we just got some good advice on estate and tax planning from Kristen Bennett. What's your take on all this?
Well, it's remarkable that we should even be having this conversation, because I think even 5 years ago, no one would really ever have imagined that there could be 32 states that provide for same-sex marriage. So, you know, it's a milestone to be able to have that conversation.
Well, you know a good many gay and lesbian couples who've been partners who've been together for a long time. How strange is it to be able to have a conversation about should we get married that you were only allowed to really have as a thought exercise, an academic exercise?
You know, the interesting thing is I've had a number of friends who've been together for a very long period of time, and for pragmatic reasons. I mean, hey, you know, look at all the benefits that you get if you get married. Mm-hmm. They decide to get married, mm-hmm. and uniformly, what they all tell me is that they are totally and completely overcome with emotion at the ceremony, never expecting that that's the way that they react. Marriage is something very special.
When you look at the 32 states and the 18 states, how do you assess all this? Where are we right now?
Well, I think we're probably a lot closer to the finish line. You know, the Supreme Court is an interesting body in that on social issues, it does not try to get too far out ahead of public opinion. And so I think that in this particular case, it's clear where they're going to go. But I think that they want the rest of the country to catch up. And I think that by essentially, in one sense, punting and not taking on the case this year, you're seeing what they expected anyway, that a lot of the lower court decisions and circuit court decisions would then be upheld and enforced, and you would be seeing states adopting by judicial mandate same-sex marriage. And the good news is, I mean, there's been virtually no pushback. I mean, I think society is in fact ready for this. Public opinion has remarkably shifted on this issue. I think people understand the humanity of it. I think Americans, by and large, are fair-minded folks. And I think once they understood that same-sex couples were being deprived of literally, you know, over 1,300 federal marital benefits, and it would have no adverse impact on them, I think they came quickly around to supporting same-sex marriage.
Let's go through a few things, though, because there is a little bit of pushback. And Ted Olson, a Republican who successfully fought Proposition 8 in California, thinks the U.S. Supreme Court, he's not pushing back, obviously, he's on your side of this, but he thinks the U.S. Supreme Court made a mistake in not taking up the case right now. I don't know if he would use the word cowardly, but basically it's, if something is wrong, it should be corrected when you recognize it's wrong, but the court is not taking that impression.
Right. And, you know, and in this particular case, I surprisingly will take exception with Ted Olson. I actually think it's probably better in the long run for society to be ready for social change, because when you have pushback, that really doesn't help advance equality or whatever that social issue happens to be. And
well,
so I think,
are there some things happening then that to your point, that maybe aren't too smart? And usually they're happening more on a local level. So take Houston, for example, where the mayor has basically been behind the issuing of subpoenas to go into certain evangelical churches and ask the preachers to show their sermons that they give. In South Carolina, there's a different case on the opposite side of that aisle, where a woman who is in a same-sex relationship and is married has legally changed her name, and to her spouse's name. And the Department of Motor Vehicles in South Carolina won't let her use her spouse's last name. So you have on two sides of the aisle, you have this push on the one hand where the rights are still trying to be obtained. And then in the Houston case, where it seems like government is going across the line, potentially crossing the religious freedom line. How do you process all that?
well, there's always this push and pull. And it's something, frankly, that you know, a civil rights movement can't control, because you can't control what a local politician or activist, you know, might do. But I think, you know, by and large, it's really following I think, I don't want to call it the constraints of our Constitution, but I think the strengths of our Constitution, in terms of always deferring on the side of freedom of speech and freedom of religion.
How different will it be for a child being born today who is gay or lesbian from your generation? What kind of world will they be growing up in the United States?
It's hugely different. I mean, really hugely different. You know, when one looks back 50 years ago, it was a crime to engage in sexual intimacy by consenting adults. The American Psychiatric Association classified being gay as a mental illness. President Eisenhower issued an executive order prohibiting gays and lesbians from being employed by our federal government in any capacity. And in most states, it was either a crime or a liquor code violation for more than one gay person to be in a bar. You know, so consequently, people needed to be deep in the closet. That had really profound psychological impact. And therefore, for a younger person to be growing up in this generation with remarkably changing attitudes, I think, you know, makes their life much easier and fuller and much more equal.
With the role of the Equality Forum having been in the forefront of fighting for rights, how do you see the mission going forward? Does the mission stay the same? Does it evolve? How does that work?
Well, no, I actually think that's a really interesting question, not only for Equality Forum, but for all the LGBT organizations. So Service Members Legal Defense Network, you know, they're out of business now because they've achieved their goal. But, you know, with every civil rights movement, there are certain issues that obviously the goal has been achieved. And so I think that really what you're going to see more of is, for example, Equality Forum has LGBT History Month. So we're the only minority community worldwide that's not taught its history at home, public school, or religious institution. So that's obviously something important that the community needs to be doing moving forward. But it also, I think you're going to see more support for LGBT scholarships and, you know, and for our community organizations.
You also mentioned worldwide. Obviously, the struggle worldwide, internationally, is far from done.
Yes, no, I mean, there is a huge gap between progressive countries and then 76 countries around the world that are totally homophobic.
I have to leave it there. Malcolm, thank you very much, sir.
Steve, always good to see you. Thank you.
Up next, 50 years and still going strong with an ever-evolving mission. That story and a look at its legendary founder in a moment on PHL 17. Now, Robert Nelson, President and CEO of Philadelphia OIC, and Mabel Ellis Wellborn, Board Chair of the Leon H. Sullivan Trust. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Good to be here.
Bob, let's take a look at something here. It was a recent honor at Philadelphia City Council, a recognition of the contributions of OIC. Big group there. What's the significance of that moment?
It's very significant. What it says is that the City Council, it has been helpful to OIC throughout the years, almost since its inception. Incredible honor to be recognized. And what we did was not only all of City Council were there, is that we brought about 40, 50 of our students, because in essence, that's who we are, the students in that regard. So we wanted them to share in that. Many of them have never been to City Hall, so they need to see that, which was not just ceremony, but significant in terms of the context in which they matriculate for us.
And the validation that takes place by a moment like that. OIC has been around for decades now, but how would you describe its vibrancy today? What's it about today?
It's vibrant, but not like it used to be. I think the world has changed so dramatically, whereby we've got to keep pace with what is now the contemporary society. We have got to really begin to relook at relevance are we still relevant? Are we still keeping pace with the jobs that are there and teaching people the skill sets to qualify?
And you do
for those
that. You
jobs?
have, for example, we're looking at some hospitality type training that goes on.
That has become our signature program in that regard. We have our graduates in probably every single hotel and restaurant in the region. And it's a great industry, particularly for those that we serve. You don't have to have a college degree. You've got to be able to work hard in that regard and have the kind of customer-friendly attitude that, makes you process. We know people come in at Bellman who now are assistant general managers of hotel. One of our graduates is the second in command at Restaurant 19 here in Philadelphia. She's become kind of our poster child for success because it follows. She's not an anomaly necessarily, but it shows the progression of that people can take once you get in that door.
Mabel, when you think of OIC, what do you think of in terms of the contributions, its impact on the community?
Oh, I think the impact has been very, very significant. Just as Bob has said, there's probably not a hotel in Philadelphia that doesn't employ a graduate of OIC, and I think that speaks volumes for the kind of work that they do at OIC. Training, it's basically teaching them customer service for the hotel restaurant business.
That's true.
It's basically what they do.
When you talk about training that goes on and the different types of training programs, when you go back to the beginnings, it was heavily manufacturing oriented. Where is it today? Not there. And our name came from that era, opportunities, industrialization, centers. Why do we still use it? Well, the syllabus suggests that's why it's OIC and not that long title. At the time, manufacturing economy. Now we've moved so dramatically to a service economy. In that regard, so you've got to be able to keep pace with that as well and begin to raise the bar. We have got to be able, as we go from 2014 and 50 years beyond, got to really look at how do we then raise the bar in terms of training, because training has now got to be commensurate, consistent with today's skill sets really required, and that's changed dramatically over the years. Well, typically, what's it take to become involved with OIC as a student? How long do you have to commit to it? What's the cost? It's a phone call. That's all there really is, and it's 215-236-7700. There's no cost involved. So that's the good part about it. And it's interesting because people make a connection between a proprietary school, which you pay to go to, is better. Well, it's really not. We have one of the best culinary arts programs in the city. We have one of the best educational programs in the city of Philadelphia. None of it costs anything. It does cost time. It does cost energy. It does cost commitment. If you bring that to the table, then welcome. Come on in, sit down, and learn. And how long is a program typically? Well, if I just use hospitality as one example, if it's culinary arts, it's 14 weeks plus 2 internships. Front desk operations is also 14 weeks. Housekeeping, janitorial, maintenance is a 7-week program, all of which have an internship involved with that. We want people to lead us, which is really a sequestered training environment, and go out and actually work here. And we see the internship as a portal to employment. Mabel, the late Reverend Leon Sullivan obviously is the founder of this and had such an impact on Philadelphia and the world. How do you see his legacy, his inspiration still applying to the OIC of today?
It's very applicable, and thanks so much for asking that question, because Dr. Sullivan was referred to recently in my presence as a bold, brave man, and it was because of those qualities that he was able to step out there and do something that needed to be done at that time. And Bob just mentioned, what does it take to get to OIC? It takes the same thing that it takes to be successful in a job, and that's the commitment, the desire to want to learn how to do something, and that just follows through the training. And so those are the qualities that Dr. Sullivan instilled in all of us who were a part of the organization from its very beginning. What's interesting, though, is I've heard him say it a number of times, characterizing himself. People say, well, who are you? Getting a sense of who this man is. He would always say invariably, I am just a poor Baptist preacher doing God's work. Absolutely. And every time he would say it, I'm looking at 6'5", 250, who sits down with presidents. Oh, okay. And it said to me that there is humility in greatness. Well, and I think to your point, he would want OIC to be larger than he is and not solely be identified with him. Absolutely. And he would always say, you guys who are now executive directors with your cute suits and your attaché cases,
don't ever lose sight of the fact that OIC is for the trainees, not you, not you. It's always about the trainees, and he never lost sight of that.
He also was a leader on the streets. He was bold, and he would go into boardrooms and he would say, we're going to boycott your business if you're not going to hire African Americans, if you're not going to give the African American employee, potential employee, a shot at this job. Is that kind of action still needed today, or a different type of action but that same spirit?
If in fact, if you impact companies financially, because that's how the selective boycotting campaign was initiated by virtue of exactly what you just said. Companies did not want to hire. Therefore, every Sunday, preachers would tell their congregations, do not buy goods and services for these companies who just rebuffed me and would not open up those doors of opportunity. It took about a year for that financial pressure. They had self-enlightenment. Well, it wasn't about being altruistic. It was literally about, we're losing money because of what this minister is doing, and those ministers in Philadelphia.
Robert Nelson, Melba Ellis Wellborn, thank you. Of Opportunities Industrialization Center, a Philadelphia institution, one that's been an amazing player on the local stage and the worldwide stage. And may OIC become ever more vibrant as it starts its second half century. That's this edition of In Focus. Thank you for watching this morning. I'm Steve Highsmith. Catch up with our special Election 2014 In Focus edition. That's later this morning at 11:30 and Sunday night at 11 p.m. after Action News on PHL 17. May you have a great weekend and enjoy your week ahead.